Hello, I'm Luther Griggs. I currently play bass in a band called Cease, like a power violence hardcore style band. I also play bass in like a power pop riot girl type band called Bad Crush. I also do vocals in a band called Stay Down, another hardcore band, and I also have an ambient solo project called A Hollow Body. And I also put on shows under the name You're In, and I also am a bit of a graphic designer, and I'm also a screen printer out of Center 3, which is a print studio downtown in Hamilton. Also, I am born and bred in Hamilton as well. Yeah, I'm a lifer. I've been here. I mean, I went to school in Toronto for a bit, but I'm a Hamilton guy. Yeah, I'm sure that's it. I don't know. I could be forgetting something else, but that's basically everything I do.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd say I have a lot of influences throughout my life. I feel like there's a lot of big people, a lot of milestones throughout different times in my life. Obviously, big one's always the parents. Both my parents, my mom and my dad, are visual artists, and they always did a lot to, I don't know, make sure that I was doing creative things. And like my dad was like a founding member of Sync and Ink, so like when I was a kid, I was always in the tattoo shop on weekends, and I was like drawing, and you see, everyone else drawing and like being creative, and I would like be there drawing and stuff too. And my mom is a painter, and when I was young, she did a lot to like, I don't know, like she put me in a lot of like drama classes and extracurricular stuff, and I was in like movie making classes and stuff when I was younger. And my dad also like got me into skateboarding at a really young age, and so I started skateboarding at like 5, and that kind of like, I feel like skateboarding always opens a lot of doors to a lot of things and like mindsets and like whatever. And like both my parents, they never really treated me like a kid. Like my dad would throw parties or like take me to see shows and stuff like that, and like all of his friends were like my friends, and I feel like I wasn't really babied much. Like I was kind of treated as an equal. And I feel like from an early age too, like besides them, I know my Uncle John was also a really big personal influence, because when I was young, he was in film school, and he would put me in his films, like in his student films.
Oh, cool.
And I feel like that was a really big deal, because being able to see somebody do something, like when you're a kid, it's kind of like, oh, that's a movie. It seems so separated, but then when you see like your uncle doing it, it seems more attainable and like something that you could do. And that's the kind of thing that like, oh, we have a video camera at home, like I'll make a video with my brothers or with my parents or something like that, and make silly videos and stuff like that. And then I think from there, like a really big influence for me too, I would say, was my grade 8 homeroom teacher. His name's Peter Martindale. I feel like he was somebody who definitely helped me feel really confident about myself. Like he was very much just like, you're a smart guy, like you have a lot of potential, and like really helped me feel confident, in school, but also like in creative stuff as well or whatever. And he was also the kind of teacher who was like, we'd watch like Whose Line Is It Anyway during recess, and like he was into skateboarding and stuff like that as well. A really, really cool guy. And then like beyond there, while I was in middle school, being someone who was into skateboarding, surprisingly enough, actually when I was in grade 6, there weren't a lot of kids in my grade who skateboarded, but all the grade 8 kids did.
Yeah.
And so there was a group of kids in grade 8 when I was in grade 6, and I would hang out with them, and we would skateboard at lunch. And that group of people ended up being people who kind of like influenced me as I grew up. And standout folks are Riley Mitchison and Jeff Lowe, John Smith. I'm sure I'm forgetting some other people, but those were folks that were like, they were like, hey, like you skateboard and you're wearing a Ramones t-shirt, like you seem cool. So like I would hang out with them, and they would kind of like put me onto stuff too. And as I was like going into high school, they were like a group of kids that were like trying to help me out or just like prepare me for things. Oh, it's okay, no worries. And they ended up making a group of friends in high school, and I started hanging with them a lot while they're in high school, and I was like leaving grade 8, that group of people, and so it was like, yeah, Riley Mitchison and Jeff Lowe and Rob McKinley and Jade Hazel and Zach Heisey, and they all kind of, during that time, they started playing in bands, and I didn't, like, that kind of seemed like unattainable as well, and so they were doing cool stuff, and I would go over to their houses, and they would play music and show it to me and just want me to be involved, and so they were a really big influence, and once, you know, their bands kind of grew and evolved, then I would say another big influence once I started playing music was like when I started going to Hammer City Records, and when I met like Craig and Brett and Scott Page, and when I started playing in bands, they were, especially Scott and especially Craig, they were very much like, you're in a band, like, do stuff, I'm going to give you opportunities, I'm going to, like, you know, we're putting on shows, what band are you playing and stuff like that, are you playing in and stuff like that, and like, what they were doing with Slamfest and having bands play in the alleyway and having bands play in the store was just like, I think, I feel like I've always knew I wanted to like put on shows and play shows and be in bands, but being around that group of people really helped me be like, I can do this, and like, this is important. Yeah. And I feel like both Scott and Craig were people who were like, this is important, and it was always like, if I started a band and it like fell apart, they would be like, okay, start another one, or like, you know, like, or like, oh, we're not playing, they're like, okay, we'll just put on a show, come play here, come play, you know, that sort of thing, and they really helped keep me motivated, and like, even though Scott ended up moving away to Montreal, and then like once Hammer City closed, and like, you know, their presence isn't as you know, here anymore, or like as active in Hamilton, but the way that they have influenced me to like keep doing what I want to do, I think will be a thing forever. You know what I mean? Like, you know, Scott used to put on a fest in Hamilton, just like a weekend fest called Everywhere Else Makes Me Sick Fest.
Oh, okay.
And I think one of my bands played it, but it was that kind of thing where it was like, it felt like nobody was really, other than Slamfest, which was its own sort of thing, it wasn't really like bring a bunch of bands together sort of thing. Like, yeah. he put on that event, and I feel like that's something that's like his motivation to do that has kind of influenced me to like want to continue to do that sort of thing and make sure it's happening, because I feel like as I get older, it's kind of like, well, nothing's happening anymore, or like these bands aren't playing anymore, and it's like, okay, well, like, let's stop making excuses and let's do what we can to make sure things are active, and there's always room for people to play and be a part of a community, and that's something that's like, yeah, pretty significant for me. So I think that I'm sure there's a million other personal influences, but those are a bunch of people that I definitely feel are a big influence in my life. In terms of musical influence, with Cease, Certse is definitely a big influence. Loma Prieta is definitely a big influence. Bands like Cult Ritual or like Total Abuse, or even like Snake Charmer. Like, you know, when I was younger, like, I had no idea like you could have a 30-second song, and so like I love be able to be in a band that's like, you know, 50-second songs or whatever. Yeah, those are some for Cease. I'm sure that again there's a million I'm forgetting. With Bad Crush, TV Freaks are a really big influence. When I was younger, I was mostly just in hardcore bands, and so I really wanted to be like, I want to be in a popular band. I want to be in a band that I can show my parents. You know what I mean? And I listen.
They'll understand.
Yeah. And not that, you know, my parents are cool. They listen to everything. But yeah, I wanted to be in like a popular band. So yeah, like TV Freaks was a big influence. The Halo Benders, Pixies, Death from Above is a really big influence on that band too. I think Death from Above, just in general, for me, like when I started playing bass, they just like the riffs Jesse would write, or just like, or even playing bass as a lead instrument and not being a totally rhythmic thing, and being like, I can be the one that writes the riffs, you know? Death from Above is, I think, influenced everything I do, probably, in terms of playing bass. And Stay Down, Loma Prieta is a big one. Taken is a big one. Code Orange Kids, specifically the kids. Same with Cease too. Like everything I Am King and before. Like not, and I do like the new Code Orange, but everything before it just has like a real energy to it and a real rawness to it that's like, I don't know, just huge. Stay Down. Maybe not so much for me, but I know like other people in the band really like Caved In and like Botch and Cursed, stuff like that. And then with my solo stuff, it's more like ambient sort of things. So a huge influence for me is Robin Guthrie, who's the guitar player for the Cockatow Twins, and also Steve Reich, who's kind of like minimalist composer who just like makes the most beautiful, lush music I've like ever heard. Or Harold Budd, who's like this other like minimalist piano player. Or another, I think, because I feel like there's the musical influences I have in my bands, but then there's the musical influences I have on my own too. And I think in terms of like when I'm at home just writing riffs for myself, huge influences, like bands that like when I pick up a bass I play stuff that sounds like these bands. Like there's a Toronto band, unfortunately no longer active, called Animal Faces, and when I started listening to this band called Animal Faces, they're like a post-hardcore screamo band, and it just kind of, it was like a brain rewiring, like the way he wrote riffs. Ryan Naray, who's the singer and guitar player in Animal Faces, I think he now plays in a band called Chris. The way he writes riffs, it's like so rhythmic, and it's such like, but it still has melody to it, and it's just like so cool. And it's like, the only reason I ever felt like I could play guitar is because I was listening to Animal Faces, but my roommate at the time when I got really into that band, he had a guitar, and I never really tried playing guitar, and I was just like messing around with it, and I was like, oh, I can do this, I can come up with stuff that sounds like that. And when I ended up buying a bass, I felt like I was just like trying to recreate that sort of sound. So Animal Faces is a huge influence for sure, enormous band for me. Another band called Solids, which is, they're like a Montreal noise rock band, also unfortunately not around anymore, but they did a split with Animal Faces, and I started listening to them, and they were kind of like a different sort of sound, because they were still, they were more of like a noise rock, alt rock kind of thing, I guess, but they were like, it was just like, they're like a one riff band. Like they find it one good riff and they just play it over and over and over, and the way you just kind of get sucked into it, and just like, it's just really great. And that's when my mind sort of changed a bit too, because I stopped playing like one string at a time, and I started playing chords on my bass, and just trying to sound exactly the same as Solids. Like I just wanted to sound like that band. And another big one is Texas, like more of a math rock emo band called Two Nights, and they were a two-piece band. And
I thought you were going to say Texas is the reason.
No.
Texas.
No, but they're like an emo band, a two-piece emo band, and fortunately enough, one of my bands got to play with them. They came to Hamilton. It was like amazing. It was mind-blowing. But the way they the guitar player just kind of fills in a lot of gaps, and his style of playing, similar to Animal Faces, it's like, it almost sounds like it's two guitars, like the way they play. It's like low end and high end, and they kind of just like go back and forth in a way that sounds really like bouncy and rhythmic and fun. And so like those three bands, like those are my go-to. Like when I hear music in my head, that's what it sounds like. You know, rather than when like I apply myself when I'm like, oh, I'm in Cease, I'm gonna write a song, that's like open 3-1 open, whatever, right? Like and I love that kind of music, but I really have to think about it more. But in terms of just like musical influence on my own, yeah, those three bands: Animal Faces, Solids, and Two Nights. Those are like big ones for me. Yeah. All right. So what got me into punk, metal, and hardcore? It's funny because like my dad has always been a punk guy and a hardcore guy. So I grew up like listening to Misfits all the time, and like the Distillers and like Iron Maiden and Slayer, and he was into the Bad Brain, or is still into the Bad Brains, and like Tiger Army was another one. I'm sure there's others I'm forgetting, but you know, he listened to that, a lot of that sort of stuff. And my mom, she was more, or is, or whatever, is into. She was like, I remember when I was young, it was a lot of like the Police and the Smiths and Fiona Apple and Tom Waits and stuff like that. And so, and it's funny because I love all of that so much now. Like, I think all that music is great. I listen to it all the time. But when I was young, it's still dad music, you know? Like, you're like, oh, my dad's listening to, you know, Static Age again, you know what I mean? Like, and it's sweet. And even when I was young, I was like, oh, this is sick. Like, clearly, you know, you grew up on it. But I feel like, and this is going to sound ridiculous, but I feel like, and when I was young, I was, like, listening to the Beatles and stuff. Like, I had a Beatles CD or whatever, or, like, the soundtrack to Small Soldiers, you know, typical classic rock type stuff. But I feel like what really changed it, and like I mentioned before, I was really into skateboarding, is when Avril Lavigne's Skater Boy came out. And like, debate whether or not it's punk, whatever, but it was like, oh, like, she looks like the people my parents hang out with, but she's like young, and I skateboard, and I can relate to it, and like, you watch the music video, and it's fun, and it was like, I remember hearing it on the radio for the first time, and just being like, this is for me, you know, like, this is my thing, and getting really into Avril Lavigne. And then my dad was like, well, if you like Avril Lavigne, then, you know, he was like, you should listen to Sum 41, and, you know, because he was paying attention, and he knew what was going on, so he's like, you should listen to Sum 41 and Blink-182, and would buy me those CDs, and then I feel like that was kind of when I started forming musical taste and like listening to that kind of stuff, and then I started listening to like, you know, like the White Stripes was a band I was really into, and Evanescence, and what were some other early ones? Yeah, I feel like that was stuff I was into when I was really, really young, and then yeah, it was like typical Much Music, pop punk kind of stuff, and then I think around the time, like, it would have been like 2005, 2006. Or 2007 maybe, is when a friend of mine introduced me to a band called Tokyo Police Club, and they're more of like a pop indie band, but I feel like, in the same thing with Avril Lavigne and Sum 41, the idea of them also being from Canada and from Ontario, it's kind of exciting, and you feel like you can relate to it a little bit more, and so when I found Tokyo Police Club, it was like that, but it was like even smaller, you know, like Tokyo Police Club's not getting, you know, people in the States don't know who they are.
Yeah, I see what you mean.
And then like getting into bands from that sort of like Ontario indie scene, so like Tokyo Police Club and like Metric and Bedouin Sound Clash was really big for me. I loved Bedouin Sound Clash, and Chaos, the rapper Chaos, I was really into him. And like Tegan and Sarah, and did I say Death from Above already? Death from Above, yeah. And then like, and I feel like there was like a circle of bands that were like around, like Dine Alone, or like City in Color was another big one, like Dine Alone and like Distort. There was like a Canadian indie scene, and they were in each other's music videos, so like there was like a Bedouin Sound Clash video where like the drummer for Cancer Bats was in it, and like, and you know, I watched so much music as a kid too, and like watching Much Loud, and then like, yeah, seeing bands like Cancer Bats was a band I ended up getting into, and Alexisonfire, and I feel like that maybe was like the beginning of like heavier stuff, But in a way, I kind of felt like, oh, like cool kids like Cancer Bats and Lex on Fire. I guess I like it too. And I love that stuff now. Like the first Cancer Bats record is really great, and I really do like Lex on Fire. But I remember watching Much Loud because there was a point in time where like cable boxes were a thing, and all of a sudden we have 900 channels rather than like 70 or whatever. And so I would watch Much Loud like in the summer, just like all day, just like and then. There was a music video for Young Leaves by Attack in Black. And it's more of like a folky punk sort of thing, but I feel like they were kind of the embodiment of like everything I was listening to up until that point.
Okay.
Because it was like good, like almost like pretty much like punk drum beats, but with like a little bit of like indie influence and like a bit of ska in there as well. Also, that was Ill Scarlet was another big one for me when I was young. But yeah, so Attack in Black was a big gateway for me because then, and I know this goes into a later question, but they played at the Casbah, and it was the first time going to a local show. I'll get into it more later, but that also kind of like opened it up to like, oh, this is a place I can go to see bands, or the fact that I see Attack in Black on Much Music and they're playing my city in like 100-cap room, and it was so cool. And then around that time is when, like I was saying, the friends that I was skateboarding with in middle school, they all started starting bands. And like I said, my friends Riley Mitchison, Jeff Lowe, Rob McKinley, and Zach Heisey, and another friend, Scott McDonald, they had a metalcore band. They had a metalcore band called Winston, and that was, and it was like, I was also really into MySpace too, which I think maybe also fueled that sort of like Canadian indie thing. But if you're on MySpace in 2008, like metalcore was the thing. It was like, and I didn't even get to a point where I liked it, but it was just like, oh, the people I look up to are playing it. But I was like kind of too much of a wimp. Like I was still like 12 or 13 at this point. Oh, okay. So like my friends are playing in these bands, and I'm seeing pictures from the shows, and it like looks crazy, and I'm like, hey Mom, can I like go to this thing? And she's like, no. And not that she like didn't want me to take part, but it was also like, I don't know, maybe I just wasn't at the point of being able to do it yet. But then later going to the Casbah, and I think it was for the Straight Reads the Line, I think it was for the author release show. And so my friends, like I said, I'd go over to their house and they would just play music for me. They'd be like, you have to listen to this. You have to. And Straight Reads the Line was one of those bands. And that was, I feel like, the first band, like heavier band, that I was like, oh, this makes sense to me for whatever reason. And that first record, Let's Get Nuts, I think is what it's called. Dallas Green from Alexis on Fire produced it, and he had a song where he sang on it. So there was like that kind of like melodic element to it still. Not to say that it was like not a really heavy record, but I was like, oh, I like this band. This band is cool. And then starting to get into that scene, and I admittedly I came in at the very tail end of it. Like I went to one of Straight Reads the Line's last shows, and I think that was like the second or third time I saw them. But like there was just that period of time where it was like, yeah, Straight Reads the Line, and like Peasant Life, and Censored Chaos, and Counterparts, and like I Am Committing a Sin, and others I'm forgetting. And it was cool too because it wasn't just metalcore, because there was pop punk bands, and there was like Call the Cavalry was another one. There, I guess they were heavier, but they had like more the melodic thing going on. And then there was bands like Life Story Monologue, and they're from Guelph, but they were more of like indie post-rock, post-hardcore kind of thing. And again, it was that sort of thing where it's like, oh, this band kind of has heavier parts, and the guy's yelling, but it still sounds prettier, It sounds like Tokyo Police Club a little bit, or like oh, it reminds me of like the Police or whatever. Not to say that they sound like the Police, but it was like an encapsulation of a lot of things. And so yeah, like going to those shows a lot, and then that scene sort of just died. It just, I don't know what happened.
Yeah.
Really, it's weird to think about, but yeah, I guess Straight Reads the Line stopped being a band, and Dead and Divine stopped being a band, and then Counterparts got huge, and then all the bands disappeared for whatever reason.
Yeah, really.
And and it was and I really liked it, and again, I was kind of like at the tail end, so I missed a lot. So I started eating it up. Like I would be on MySpace or Facebook and like trying to look at pictures and what bands are playing, whatever, and then end up getting really into Misery Signals and Means, and Holly Springs Disaster was a really, really big one. Like when I was a teenager, I would go to parties with my friends, and it was like the climax of the night was listening to the Holly Springs Disaster record and like everyone just singing along, and that was a huge deal. What's another? I'm forgetting bands, but yeah, retroactively getting into a lot of that stuff, and learning about it and liking it and whatever, and then I feel like the next phase was when so Dan Troop and Kelsey Gallagher from Peasant Life, they're in a metalcore band called Peasant Life, and Ryan Gentilla, the drummer from Counterparts, and my friend Tanner Jackson, who I think played in bands, but I knew him just through friends, they started Snake Charmer. And so when I was like 15, 16, I think, and it was like, oh, Dan and Kelsey from Peasant Life and Ryan from Counterparts have a new band. Yeah. And then you go see them, and it's nothing like that. No. There's no breakdowns. The sets are 7 minutes long, but they play 10 songs, you know?
Once.
Yeah, oh yeah, and it just like, it blew my mind. Yeah. And it was like, and it was just totally different. And I had known Dan from, I actually met him at that first Straight Reads the Line show that I went to. And I got introduced to my friend Sonny Nguyen, who used to be in that scene. He was a photographer, and he introduced us. And so when Snake Charmer started, Dan, I guess, I can't remember why, but we connected, and I made pins for them because I had a button maker, and so I went over to his house, and he was just like, oh, like he showed me Touche Amore, which I had never really heard anything like that yet, and then also a band called The Men, and then also I remember, might have been the third or fourth time I had seen Snake Charmer. They played in the alleyway, and I had just met a friend of mine called Liam Baker, who has played in a lot of bands. He's in Coke Jaw and Namak and Sia Call and stuff like that. But I just met him, and he's like, are you going to see Snake Charmer? I'm like, yeah, I am, and getting excited because I'm like, oh, I just made this friend, and he knows about this too, and he was like, yeah, they cover Left 4 Dead, and I didn't know who Left 4 Dead was, and so seeing them, and again, I'm sort of out of the loop, I don't know what's going on, and then eventually Snake Charmer puts out that first tape that has the Who Do You Know cover on it, and then it'll be like, oh, that's the song that they play. And then like getting exposed to that, and then like it's like a new version of hardcore. Like I knew the like heavy stuff, the breakdown stuff, or like the melodic post-hardcore type of stuff, but this was like raw, and it was like it felt even more accessible because it's like that stuff seemed more technical. You know, you got double kick, whatever. But hearing Snake Charmer, it was like different, and then like listening to. Early Touche Amore and Hoax and Death from Above and The Men. It was like, a new phase. And then they played in the alleyway behind Hammer City, and then I was kind of too scared to go down there at the time. I'm like, I'm not cool enough. I don't know what's going on at Hammer City. And then eventually I went down by myself, and Brett Hawley was working, and just like nicest guy. and he was someone who I think I kind of knew because he kind of hung out with like the Sink and Ink crew of people. And so I kind of knew him, but I didn't want to be like, hey, do you remember me? I was probably 4 years old, whatever. But he was so nice, and he was just like pulling out records and being like, you should listen to this, or what do you like? And like, tell me what you like. Oh, we have this that sounds like this. And obviously I'm young, so I don't have any money. But it was just like, and that's what I came to realize was that store. It was like, you just go there. I mean, it's a bummer that not everyone was spending money,
Yeah.
I did when I could. But it was that space where you could just be like, oh, what do you like? Like, I'll put this on. And it, getting exposed to so much cool stuff there. And then, like, getting into Snake Charmer, and that's when, like, there was, like, this new hardcore thing that was happening in Hamilton. And then, like, I saw so I think it might have been the first or second time I saw Snake Charmer was at a house show, which, again, huge, because in my mind, music only existed at the Casbah, and now Snake Charmer, is playing in the basement at my friend's house, and there's literally 10 people down there, and I remember the floor was just like covered in beer, and people were slipping, and it was just ridiculous, and again, it was like 7-minute set, and just like so wild, and talking to Dan, and he was like, well, we're playing next weekend at another house, you should come, and so I'm like, okay. And so I go to the show, and it was I can't remember whose house it was, but this show was in a living room, which felt even weirder.
Yeah.
But it was Snake Charmer opened, and then it was Crop Failure. I don't know if you know Crop Failure. They were more of like a post-hardcore, almost like Fugazi, very Fugazi, kind of Sonic Youthy kind of band. And they're amazing, such a great band. And Born Wrong played too.
Okay.
And admittedly, I like Born Wrong didn't click for me right away, but then it was also like 2 other new things that I hadn't experienced yet. You know what I mean? And so that blew it up even further. And then these people are like, well, then you got to listen to TV Freaks, and TV Freaks was a big thing. And then like people in those bands came to form, like Social Divorce, which was a really big deal, and that sort of scene was just really cool. And my first band, which I guess I'll talk about later, but we were coming up, and there was another band called Knot that Liam Baker played in, and my friend Nate Ivanko, and a bunch of my other friends, and they started Burn Victim, and it was just like, it was so exciting. It was like a totally new thing. And at the same time that was happening, it was kind of happening everywhere, or maybe I was paying attention to it a little bit more. And so I started going to Toronto to go to shows on my own, and there was just like a really good scene happening there. And I remember too, when my first band started talking to Kelsey from Snake Charmer, and I'm like, playing Toronto again when you're a teenager, it's like, oh, I can't play Toronto, that's so intimidating. And he was like, oh, I'll let Greg know and he'll put you on a show. And then finding out about Not Dead Yet and the shows that he put on, and then you just discover it's like gates open.
Yeah.
And my good friend M. Cuthbert used to run a distro and put on shows in Toronto under the name A Mountain Far, and they were a little bit more in line with the post-hardcore and screamo type of stuff. And again, like, the stuff that I was really more drawn to, and again, I like it all. I really like the noisy and abrasive stuff. Drawn to more was, like, the more emotional stuff, not as much of the angry type of stuff, but more like the borderline sad kind of thing. And so I ended up finding out about that because I feel like there was a lot of crossover with, like, the hardcore punk scene in Toronto, with bands like Total Trash and other bands I can't think of right now, but like they would all kind of play each other's shows, and then that's when around the time I discovered that band Animal Faces that I mentioned earlier. And Animal Faces actually opened for Pianos Become the Teeth and Xerxes in Toronto. And Pianos Become the Teeth was a band I ended up discovering through Touche Amore, and that was another band that just blew my mind. And they were like, it was so raw and emotional and like heartbreaking, but also like kind of scary at the same point. and they had like, I don't know, just really, really beautiful music. I feel like I'm kind of losing my place now, but I started going to shows in Toronto, meeting tons of people, going to those Mountain Far shows, going to Not Dead Yet shows, meeting even more people, you know, like, and I feel like that is kind of led me to where I am now.
Nice.
And there was, yeah, like, I started my first band, I think I was like 18, 17, and then, you know, things fizzle or whatever, and then bands whatever, and those ended, and then most of actually, other than Cease, all the bands I'm in now started pretty much right before the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
And it was kind of like the death of those bands again, like having that like idea in mind of like, don't stop, don't let it end, and like, and truly like going to shows and playing shows is like all I care about, really. Everything else, I feel like most of my life is just filler in between playing and going to shows. Like live music is truly like so important to me, and I just have that idea in my head, and like over the years, being so inspired by everything that's going on around me, I don't want it to end, and I don't, not even for myself, but people in the city as well. You know, like I don't ever want the scene to die, and like when there's moments where it seems like, oh, no one's playing, no one's this, you know, where are the new bands, whatever, and it's like, it's our job to make it keep going, you know what I mean? Yeah, so I feel like those are the different stages of me getting into punk and hardcore, different eras, and actually before I end, and I feel ridiculous for not mentioning this earlier, but Riley, Rob, and Jeff, who were in that metalcore band and who I knew in middle school, they ended up around the Snake Charmer era. They started a band called Deaded, and Winston and Peasant Life would play together. And so they kind of had like a relationship with those people, so when Snake Charmer became a thing, they were like, okay, well, we can start a band now too. And then they were in a band called Deaded, and Deaded was another big, huge thing, and for me, and a huge influence on my first band, and me wanting to start a band, because those are friends at the time who were people I was really close with. And they were like, they did their first tape, like, I think, maybe even in that house where my friend put on that Snake Charmer show. I think they played, because it was his parents' rental house, so when it was empty, they would just throw parties in there.
Nice.
And I think they recorded their first tape there. And so it was like, you can just record a tape, and, you know, if you have a microphone and a laptop, that's all you need. And there were also people who, they were the tastemakers for me too, right? So we grew up listening to the same stuff, so whatever they were doing, it sounded like what I would want to hear. And I think they're, in terms of Hamilton hardcore bands, they are one that is so overlooked. The Deaded, DEBT''D, like, the first tape is really good, the self-titled one, but their second tape, Show Me Your Money, is just fucking wild.
Nice.
It's like, and they're also a band that showed me the importance of feedback. Like, you can, like, have your guitar screech out, and it sounds sick. It's not a bad thing. And also through that, you know, they showed me bands like Cult Ritual and Raw Nerve and stuff like that, and that was also a gateway into that. And so before I just, you know, end what I was saying, I definitely just want to big shout out to Deaded, and those folks ended up going on to form a amazing post-punk band called Black Baron that everyone should listen to. You know, in my mind they're huge, but sometimes I realize not everybody listens to everything I listen to. And like I feel like a lot of them are doing like cool, like obscure black metal stuff or like noise projects and stuff like that. But yeah, Deaded is the shit. You should listen to Deaded. So my first ever concert, I guess technically, I think I saw David Wilcox at like some, like, I don't know, it was like Festival of Friends, but it was in Cambridge, because my dad used to live in Cambridge. And it was the first time I ever saw live music. I know that for sure. But the first, like, concert with intent that I wasn't just like a kid waiting to go on the Ferris wheel while David Wilcox plays next to it. But I think it was for my 10th birthday, my dad got me tickets to see Sum 41 in Kitchener. I don't remember the name but it was like in a hockey arena. And it's funny enough, No Warning opened for that show. And it was I think Sum 41's third album called Chuck came out. And I was like huge into Sum 41 at the time. I was really excited. But it's wild that was my first concert. And it was like a big hockey arena, and they were like playing at the end, I remember, and there was like the general admission area, but we had the seats right at the edge, right before the pit. And again, I've never seen anything like this before. And No Warning opened. And so I listened to Sum 41, and then you see how people are reacting to No Warning, and they did a Wall of Death, and it like, again, I'm 10 years old, I think. Yeah, I was 10. And I was like, what the hell? I was actually scared. Like I was like, this is sick. I mean, nowadays, sure, cool, that's dope, whatever. But that was scary. And I remember after the concert, like we went to like the variety store to get a soda or something. And I remember seeing a girl who had like no shoes and like her mascara is like, she's all sweaty and like all these kids are just like, and I was like, honestly, I was really afraid of that sort of stuff. Like I really liked the music, but I was like, this is wild. And it's funny like how I ended up, still listening to that sort of stuff and getting to a point where I like engage in that sort of thing, because I remember actually being like freaked out by it. And then again, I don't know if it counts, but seeing Attack in Black at the Casbah was like a really big thing for me. And what's even cooler is that well, actually, I'll talk more about that first concert actually, because I think I had it might have been the summer before I entered high school, and they were playing with Shotgun Jimmy and I can't remember if there was another band, but and it was my first time ever going to the Casbah, first time going to anything like that by myself too. I think I was 13, and I asked my friends, and like Attack in Black was like on Much Music, they were kind of big, so I'm like, asked my friends Christy Burke and Allie Bowman, they came with me to go see it. And the ticket, I think I had to go to Dr. Disc to get the tickets, which is wild to think about now. And we got tickets, and we went. The show started at 8, but the bands didn't start till 10. Mm-hmm. And it was like, I think a Sunday. And my friends had to leave before the bands even started. Yeah. And we were just like young and didn't know, right? Like, and it was wild just standing around for 2. And it was funny too, because my friends had to leave. And I was just there alone. And I'm like this 13-year-old kid probably in an ocean of like 20-year-olds just waiting, being like, why is it taking so long? I don't understand, like why, in my head it's like you go and it starts, you know what I mean? And so yeah, that was my first like local show. And I remember seeing them the following year. They played with Lady Hawk. And at that point, I had started going to like those metalcore shows, so I kind of had an idea of like the scene and what was going on, and being aware of what was happening at the Casbah. But I remember we went and saw Attack in Black, and I think at this point, because their big record, Marriage, was the one that I saw Young Leaves off on Much Music, and so they just put out the second record, which was like not punk at all, like barely electric guitars, but it's still a really beautiful record. It's more folky, kind of sounding record, and so they're playing their new stuff and some of the stuff off the previous record, but then they play a song, or they're like, "What do you guys want to hear?" And I remember someone yelling, "Cut and Run," and I didn't know that song, and in my head, because. It's funny because like I feel like nowadays you can Google everything, but in my head this band only had 2 albums, and so the singer Dan Romano was like, "We'll play it, but I'm not singing it." Oh. And so someone from the crowd, who I now learned is a good friend of mine, Ross Miller, who plays in Single Mothers, and he has other bands called The Stoves and Telepathic Love, all great bands. This guy, Ross Miller, who's now my friend, came up on stage and sang the song Cut and Run, and it's a hardcore song. It's a full-blown hardcore song, and I didn't expect it. And again, I'm describing to you what they sound like, right? And it was nuts. And I was there with my friend Riley, and there was also parts in the song where the guitar feeded back, and he was like moving his guitar to make it, make weird sounds and stuff like that. And I remember him being like, he's playing the feedback. And again, it's like all these sorts of things that just like, you don't think about, and then finding out, or because I feel like their previous EP, or they had 2 EPs before that, I couldn't find them online, but there was like a couple YouTube videos of these songs, and that was another brain-changing moment too. And also like I kind of said, as I go through the scenes and whatever, I always really like a marriage of genres, like when people play all kinds of things, when they kind of marry the light with the heavy, and that was very mind-blowing. And now I know that like Attack in Black was a full-blown hardcore band. Apparently half their set would just be Minor Threat covers before they even play their own songs, you know what I mean? So yeah, but I would say, yeah, Sum 41, No Warning, first ever concert, and then my first like local show was seeing Attack in Black at the Casbah. Yeah.
Nice.
So I'll mention there's a few. I'll just give a few shows I'll give like honorable mentions to before I get to like my all-time favorite show I've ever gone to. But my first band, I think it might have been my second or third show, but and we were like desperate to play shows, and we didn't know anybody. We were teenagers or whatever. So we didn't know how to get on shows, really. Like, our first show thankfully was a Slam Fest, so that was easy to get into. But I remember Deaded and Social Divorce were playing a house show in the apartment above White Elephant on James Street North. And it was called Adam's Apartment. I didn't know the guy, but they announced that they were playing a show, and we're just like, well, let's just ask. And like, at this point, I'm friends with these people, and I'm like, can we play? And they're like, yeah, you can play. And it happened during Art Crawl, so the streets were full of people, and it was like, I don't know if we had flyers, but I remember like before the show, we were like walking around, and like when I was in high school, Art Crawl was like the coolest thing. Like everyone just hangs out at Art Crawl and hangs out on the street. My friends would sell art and stuff.
Was this a Stay Down show?
No, this is my first band was called Sketchbooks.
Okay.
Yeah, this is in 2012 maybe, and Art Crawl was happening, so it was like we're hanging out, and I'm telling everyone my band's playing up there. Like, where are you playing? Up there, like we're on James Street hanging out, and I remember we go up to set up, and I remember tiny room, and I remember nobody brought cymbals. And we were teenagers, so we didn't have good gear. So I had like these cymbals that were like this big, sounded awful. But that room was so packed, and like all of my friends, and the whole show was just so nuts. And in my mind, that was like the peak of like that era of like Hamilton hardcore. And I think, I don't know, it was just really significant. So that show was really great. It was Deaded and Social Divorce and my band Sketchbooks and Adam's Apartment on James Street North. Nice. It was insane. There's videos of that too. I should show you them. There. It's a great show. Another one is my band Stay Down. We had opened for Loma Prieta in Toronto for New Friends Fest. I think it was 2018 or 19. I can't remember the year. I'm so bad with years. And I had seen Loma Prieta. They're like probably my favorite heavy band. Mm-hmm. I'd seen them a few times already, but they're the kind of band, they get pegged as like a screamo band. So like when people see them, nobody moshes. But in my head, they're like a destroy the room type band. Like they got the craziest riffs and like greatest breakdowns. Maybe even, in my opinion, the best breakdown ever. And so we Stay Down. We got asked to play the show, which was mind blowing to me. Not only to play with Loma Prieta, but Jerome's Dream had just reunited, and we were opening for Jerome's Dream. And my friend's band Piper Maru were playing, and it was just so exciting. It was a huge deal for us. And we play, and I think it was probably, in terms of performance or being tight, probably the tightest we've ever played. But and then Piper played, and then Jerome's Dream played, and I remember like Loma Prieda's about to go on, and I'm like, is this gonna suck again? But they start, and the room goes crazy, and it was just like nuts, and everyone's screaming the words and jumping on top of each other and stomping around. That's one that was really, really big. And then I also mentioned I saw Death Grips at Danforth, and that was just nuts. Like the sound, and it was just like a red light, and their music is just so insane, and the crowd was really insane, and it was almost like, I don't know, it was like getting sucked into another world for a moment seeing that band. That was really, really wild. Well, I'll do one more shout out before I say my favorite. There was another time Caravels were playing at this house venue in Toronto called Scramden Yards, and Animal Faces, this band I keep going on and about, they played, but Ryan didn't want to do vocals, so M, who's my friend who I was telling you ran that label, they played in a band called Foxmolder, and it was like full-blown screamo, or like emo violence, I guess what they call it. It's like screamo with blast beats in it. Yeah. And so M had these like really harsh, shrill vocals, and they did the vocals for Animal Faces, and so it sounded even like crazier. Yeah. That was a show that was like huge for me. But my all-time #1 favorite show I've ever gone to was at the Casbah in 2018. It was a matinee show. And there's this band called A Place to Bury Strangers. I don't know if you know A Place to Bury Strangers, but they were like this, like, I think they're a third wave shoegaze band, and in my head they were really big, and I hadn't really gotten into them yet, but I knew that they were like big band. Like, yeah. A Place to Bury Strangers was just a name that you know. You never forget a name like that, right? Like, and they're playing at Casbah on like 2 p.m. on a Saturday, and I'm like, this is insane. And I was like telling people, I'm like, Place to Bury Strangers playing, and they're like, I didn't even know they were still a band. And they were like, they're from New York. Like, they're not even, like, in my head, they're a big band. Yeah. I'm like, I can't believe they're playing Casbah. And I go, and that band, Black Baron, that I just mentioned, they were supposed to open, but they dropped off. So my friend Vince, who I play in all my bands with, he came with me because I think he was interested to see Black Baron, but he just came anyway. And this person I was dating at the time, we go to the show. I get tickets to go to the show, and there's maybe no more than 20 people there. Oh, yeah. There's no one there. And in my head, it's like, there should be tons of people here. Like, I can't believe it. And they were touring with some band, and I can't remember. They were cool, whatever, but it was just like, it was like a two-piece, like, noise rock kind of thing. And it was like, you know, like I said, midday, lights are bright, whatever, fine. And then they go on, and they had like 3 projectors, 2 smoke machines, maybe like 7 strobe lights, and their guitar, bass, drums, and like the smoke just goes wild, and the whole place is smoked out. And they go into like their craziest, noisiest song they probably have, and it was just like insane. And like the guitar player has a stack all the way to the ceiling, like craziest. Like they have their own branded earplugs. I bought their own earplugs because it was like insane loud, and it was just so wild. And so they're playing this like crazy loud music. Place is smoked out, strobe lights are going crazy, and it's like, again, like transported into another world, and there's like nobody there, and it's just like insane, crazy, loud, like, and I remember at the point, there was a point where they're like still playing like their faster stuff, and their bass player just like started he came out into like the crowd area and started smashing his bass in the middle of the room, and you can barely see anything because there's so much smoke and the lights are so wild. And while he's doing that, without even knowing, the guitar player and the drummer grab an AV cart from the back of the room, and they roll it out, and they have all these synths on it, and they're wheeling it around while playing all this crazy like techno music, and they have lights shooting out of the AV cart. and they're playing it. It's again insanely loud, and then the bass player, and it was wild too because there was nobody there, but some people had brought their children. Like there was kids there, and the bass player, he goes up and he puts his bass around this little girl who's at this concert, and he's like, play it, and she starts playing the bass. He climbs up on top of the AV cart, grabs his bass, and then he starts playing the bass standing on top of the AV cart while they're wheeling it around, playing like this like techno music. And that was like phase 2. And then they go back to the stage, and then they go back into just like insane, like music so loud you feel like your body's about to dissolve. Like just insane. I remember the guitar player, he had like 3 guitars who were just smashed to bits and like screwed together, and he like was scraping it on the ceiling, and he grabbed one of the strobe lights and puts it on the guitar, and you can hear the pulsing going through the guitar and just making this insane wall of noise. And then that ends again, and then there's like one spotlight that comes onto the drummer, and she has a little harp, and then she just does this like beautiful like operatic ballad, and then it's just like just gorgeous music, and then boom, right back into like the like insane just wall of noise. And like the drummer at the time, she was just like so fast, and like the noise was just nuts. And it was like it was like cold dead like sober, like didn't drink or do anything like that, but I was like it was like a really psychedelic and like out of body experience, and it was so insane. And I remember they stopped playing, and you just felt like time, like you lived a lifetime, but it was also like a blink of an eye. It was insane. And again, there was like no more than 20 people there. And I look over to my girlfriend at the time, and she just tears, just crying. And I'm just like, that show literally changed my life. It was like, it just changed your perspective, because you know, you think you play in a band and you just play the music, but they like pushed the limits of like what a performance could be. And then also seeing that at the Casbah was wild, because it was like they just really took advantage of the full area.
Full room.
Yeah, it was nuts. And it was wild too, because it was midday. We walked out of there, 5 o'clock, sun was shining. People outside have no idea that we have just like been changed forever. It was nuts. A Place to Bury Strangers. Even if you've never heard them and you know they're playing, go see A Place to Bury Strangers, because it'll rock your world for sure. So I feel like, surprisingly enough, I haven't really seen that much crazy stuff at shows. I've definitely heard about it. I have had friends who have done and seen crazy stuff at shows. I've had like fireworks shot in my face. I've had a Roman candle shot directly into my face. I think that was actually, it was Coke Jaw in the Hammer City Records alleyway. But yeah, I've had friends went to see a Haymaker and just get shit sprayed in their face. I guess in terms of I feel like the craziest thing that's ever happened to me at a show is I had just gone through a really bad breakup, and I was like really depressed. And then Snake Charmer, who plays once every 3 years or whatever, announces that they're playing a show at Doors, and I think that show was with Sia Call and Pedestrian. I think they were called Pedestrian. They're playing, and I was like not doing well. I was like really down in the dumps. But when Snake Charmer plays, it's just like I know I'm gonna go crazy. It's gonna be the best. But it was funny because I was newly single, and I had just matched with my biggest high school crush on Tinder, and I was supposed to meet up with her after the show. And so I was like, I get to see this band, I'm going to see this girl that I used to like, whatever happens. But I go to this show, and I see my friends, and I'm like, I hope I get knocked out tonight. Because I'm just like, I'm like not doing well. I'm emotionally kind of in a wreck, and And it was funny. I didn't get knocked out, but you know the opening bands play, and I remember Snake Charmer plays, and it was maybe a minute into the set. I just felt someone's elbow.
So 4 songs in.
Yes, yeah. I felt someone's elbow just enter my eye socket, like fully, like it felt like it was inside my head, like perfectly, like a puzzle piece. Elbow, eye socket, and my eye swells so much immediately that I thought my eye had fallen out of my head because it was just like it felt like it was out. And I run to the back of the room, and my friend Chelsea, who sang in Pedestrian, was there, and she's like, what's wrong? And I take my hand off of my eye, and she was just like, oh my god. And I'm like, is it still in? And she's like, yeah. And I go down to the bathroom at Doors, and it's like, just like red and fully closed and just swollen like I had like I don't know, like a softball as a part of my face. And so I'm going through the shock of just like my face being destroyed, and then I realize I'm going on a date afterwards. And so I go upstairs and I'm like, oh my god, I have to like meet this girl afterwards. She's gonna think I'm a fucking idiot. So the show ends, and I go to meet her at Che, just down the road, and I get there, and she, like, completely just ignored me, didn't see me, not a big deal, whatever. I said hi, we said hi, it was chill. But I bumped into some other friends there, and they're just like, you look sick, like, this is so cool. And I think for, like, at least a month or two, like, my face was just green and purple, my eye was completely, like, it was just like a pool of blood in my eye, like it was so messed up. But yeah, I think that I also actually I think I broke a rib at Scene Counterparts once too. Okay. I fell on the stairs at Absinthe. I jumped on top of the crowd and just like crashed, and I broke a rib on the edge of the stage there too. But those two, yeah, everything else has been good. Nothing else crazy, I don't think. Yeah. So my first band that I've already mentioned, were called Sketchbooks. I was in grade 12 when we started, so I was like 17, I think. And again, like Snake Charmer and Deaded and those bands started playing, and so I was like really eager to start a band. And I had a drum kit. My dad had like, I think he traded a tattoo for a drum kit.
Nice.
And so I had a drum kit since I was like 5 years old, but I never got to use it because my parents always lived in like apartments and stuff, and he lived in a house. He was living in Cambridge for a long time, and he came back to Hamilton, and luckily enough our downstairs neighbors were cool with me playing the drums, so I started playing the drums a lot, being really inspired by the scene that was happening. And so in my grade 12 English class, my friend, or someone who had yet to be my friend, but this kid that sit next to me, Tom Howell, because in high school iPods were the thing, so you go through everyone's iPod, and I saw that he was listening to this band called Native, who are kind of like a part of that era of music with Touche Amore and Pianos Become the Teeth and La Dispute and stuff like that. This like amazing post-hardcore emo screamo type thing. And like I knew, like, my friend Riley had shown me Native, but I didn't know anybody else who knew that band. And so when I saw that was on his iPod, I was like, this is so cool that you like this. And so we just started talking about music, and I found out that he played guitar. And so I was like, well, we should start a band. And then he came over and we started jamming. I was originally on drums, and we came up with a couple songs. But I always really wanted to do vocals, mm-hmm. and like Straight Reads the Line was always a big influence, and that was a band where I'm like, I could do that, I could sound like that. But I couldn't drum and do it at the same time. So my best friend at the time, Connor Jessam, they were a drummer, and I knew that they like had played in cover bands and stuff like that, but it didn't really seem like they were interested and like being in a band, but I was just like, well, Connor plays drums. Let's just ask Connor if they want to do it. So Connor ended up started playing drums, and then around this time, there was another Hamilton band called Not, who at the time were like a ska band, and turned into like a hardcore power violence band. And Vince went to high school with those folks, with like Liam Baker and Nate Ivanko, and he ended up playing second guitar in Not, and he was like dating someone that we knew, and I was like, well, he plays guitar, he can play bass. And so we just asked him if he wanted to play bass, and then they all started coming over to my house, and we started sketchbooks. It was very like inspired by Touche Amore. I think we were really just trying to sound like Touche Amore and Deaded, and our first. It was funny because we started, I think, or like me and Tom started hanging out right at the beginning of second semester of grade 12, and then we kind of started making music together, and then the summer was approaching, and he worked full time during the summers at a summer camp, and so we're like, okay, before the summer starts, we have to put out a tape and we have to play a show, and so we were just like hustling, and again, like being inspired by my friends who were just recording their bands in their house, we're just like, well, let's just do it ourselves. By the time school had ended, I got a graduation gift of, I got a MacBook. Like, all my family pulled together to get me a MacBook, and MacBooks have GarageBand, and my stepdad had just started doing podcasts, like, with friends and stuff like that, so he had a Yeti mic, and we just recorded everything at Tom's house, because he ended up renting a drum kit from Long McQuaid so we could practice at his house, and we recorded everything ourselves on GarageBand, and then like it sounds pretty good for kids who had no idea what they were doing. And we got the tape done, and one of my neighbors had passed away, and so they were just kind of like putting all this old man stuff onto the street, and there was just 2 boxes just full of cassettes, and so I was like, oh, I'll just take all of these, and like I feel like this was a point in time where like cassette felt like the only way you could really get your music into a physical medium. Like, I guess, I don't know, we were just like too young to be like, I don't know how to put out a CD. How do you do that? I have no clue. I guess you could like burn it and put a sticker on it, but cassettes made more sense. It was cheap, it was easy. And so we made our cassettes on there, and it's funny because they're like 90-minute cassettes. Our tape was maybe 10 minutes. And so, but all these tapes, they were like radio recordings of like Frank Sinatra and Tony Bennett. So like these tapes are 10 minutes of us, and then like 50 minutes of Tony Bennett, you know? So we made a bunch of those, and then luckily enough, there's a Slam Fest happening, and my friend Kelsey, who sings in Snake Charmer, was booking that Slam Fest, and I think Social Divorce was playing, and Spearhead, and there was a band, oh gosh, I can't remember what they're called. They're called like Negative something. I can't remember. No, Direct Approach. I always think Negative Approach, but they were called Direct Approach. We played with them, and these were like Toronto Not Dead Yet bands that I knew like from going on Bandcamp and seeing show posters and stuff like that. So in my head, I'm like, oh, we gotta play with these bands. And some band fell off. I can't remember who was supposed to play. And I asked him, I'm like, oh, can we play? And we played our first show, and it was a really great time. And it's funny, too, because I feel like that era of hardcore, too, before it was like you go to the Casbah and you see everyone play on the stage, but this was the point in time where everyone was playing on the floor. It was like, fuck the stage, we're playing on the floor. And so, like, you know, got down on the floor, you sing on the floor. It was a great time. So sketchbooks was a thing. I think we were a band for maybe 2 years, maybe 3. It just got to a point where Tom, I think, was a little bit more focused on work and just didn't have enough energy to go into it. And during that period of time, probably even inspired by the fact that Tom was away in the summer, I'm like, well, I'll just start another band. So me and Vince Soliveri, who played bass in Sketchbooks and who is like one of my best, most closest friends, and he's played in almost every band I've ever been in and is in all of my bands now. Him and I wanted to start a band because I also wanted to play drums because I wasn't playing drums in Sketchbooks. I was doing vocals. And so I was like, well, let's start something else. And Sketchbooks, again, was more of like a post-hardcore type thing. And then around that time is when like Code Orange Kids started popping up. And I think it was right before their LP had dropped. Like they just had, I think they had a split with Full of Hell and a Cycles EP and one EP before that. And I'm just like, I want to be in a heavy band. Yeah. I want to be in like a band with mosh parts, with breakdowns, you know. So we started a new band with me and Vince. I played drums, Vince played guitar, and my friend Sam Walker played bass. And my friend Liam Baker, who I mentioned before, he did vocals. And we were called Kennel Cough. And we played 2 shows, I think. We played a Slam Fest, and then we played a house show. Another, what in my head is another a very iconic house show is in this person named Oscar's Basement. My friend Nate Ivanko had put on that show, and it was Social Divorce and Not and Us, Kennel Cough. And that was like, and there's lots of videos of that show. I actually shot that show on VHS, and I can't find the tape. It drives me insane that I can't find that tape. I think those were the only shows we played. There might have been another one in there. We never recorded anything. I think Nate might have recorded one of our practices because we had to practice at his house one time, but I don't know where that went. I think it might be somewhere. I don't know. Yeah, so that, I don't remember why that ended, but it ended. And then Sketchbooks ended up ending. We played our last show at the White House, which is like an apartment at the corner of King and Wentworth. That show was really cool. We played with a screamo band from Chicago called Edo. They were really great. I think Life in Vacuum and Congratulations and a band from Guelph called Fossil played that show. And it was cool because at that point, Sketchbooks, we had then put out another tape. My friend Riley recorded that one. We put a little bit more time into it. He knew what he was doing. He was using Pro Tools. He knew how to mix. You know, he understood EQ. And I think our second tape is really good. I still listen to it frequently. But at that point, we were getting more inspired by more on the punk side of things. And that was when the band Ice Age was getting really big. And we started trying to sound more like Ice Age, less of a screamo band, but more of like a punk band. But yeah, Sketchbooks ended. And I think somewhere in there, maybe while Sketchbooks was still a thing, yes, it was still a thing because I booked a Slam Fest, which was like such an honor. First show I ever booked, almost 10 years ago. It was December 2013, so almost 10 years ago. It was the first show I ever booked. Craig and Jamie let me book a Slam Fest, and I got 2 Crosses from Kitchener to play. They were a band I really, really liked. And then a Toronto band, because at this point, I had started meeting people in Toronto. I might have even been living in Toronto at that point once I started going to college. And so I met this group of kids who played in a band called Spore. They were like a really good power violence band. Those folks went on to form like Real World and Friction and stuff like that. So they played, and there's a band called Dry Socket that was supposed to play, and it was my friend Tom, Ethan, and Nate Ivanko, and they were supposed to play, but I think at that point Burn Victim was a thing, and I think Nate played drums, and he broke his finger, so he couldn't. So Dry Socket couldn't play, so we were like, well, let's just start a new band. And so because they couldn't play, we started another band. We had 1, maybe 2 practices, wrote as many songs as we could. And I remember that was such a great show because, and I played bass too. It's the first time I ever played bass. And I think, again, it was that at that point where like I tried playing my friend's guitar. I'm like, oh, I can play bass. It's not that hard. And that was another very Code Orange Kids inspired band where just like I wanted to be heavy, and I just and it was like, and it was a Christmas Slam Fest, And Christmas Slam Fests, you know, they set up the Christmas decorations, and it's always intended to get torn down. And we played first, and I loved feedback, so I played the whole show into the amp. Like, I didn't look out. And so we started playing, and it was like a very, like, just breakdowns and blast beats. That's all it was. And I played to the amp the whole time, and I remember I turned around, and the whole place was destroyed. Like, the Christmas tree obviously just shattered, and so that band was called Ashes. We called it Ashes. We had one practice, played one show, and it was me playing bass, Ethan Hibianada, Joe from Bird Victim playing guitar, and Nate Ivanko sang in that band. And then, so after that, when Sketchbooks ended, there was this band, this screamo band from Chicago that I really liked called Lord Snow were coming to Hamilton. And they had played once in Hamilton already, but I was living in Toronto at that point, so I didn't get to see them. But I saw them when they played in Toronto. But they played with Snake Charmer and one other band I can't remember. I remember being so bummed out. I'm like, they were one of my favorite bands at the time. I'm like, I really wish I could have gone to see Lord Snow at doors in Hamilton in my hometown. And then I heard they were coming back. And so I just like, I need to know who's booking the show. And I found out it was Caleb from like Mare and Circle Takes the Square, who worked at Doors at the time. And I just like went into Doors and he was working, and I was just like, hey, are you booking the Lord Snow show? And he's like, yeah. And I'm like, well, can I play? And he's like, yeah, sure. And so I'm like, but I don't have a band anymore. And so I was just like, okay, well, I got to start a band. And so I went and I bought a bass, and my friend Connor, who was in Sketchbooks, we just started a 2-piece band. We were called Wimp City, and it was so much easier. Being in a 2-piece band is the greatest thing ever, you know, especially when you're in a 2-piece band with your best friend. Like, it was literally like we would just hang out in their basement and watch a movie, and then be like, well, you just want to come up with a song? And we practiced so much, and we jammed so much, and I think, like, Wimp City, that band, best songs I've ever written, too. Like, and it was very influenced by Animal Faces and Solids, like I was mentioning before. We put out one EP. We recorded a second one that is still not out, but is done. I should just put it out. But yeah, so there was Wimp City. I played bass, Connor played drums, and I did vocals too. Yeah, like screamo, post-hardcore, noise rock kind of thing. Maybe more on the noise rock. That was also like me getting really into the feedback, being really inspired by Deaded and Cult Ritual, and being like, the screeching is a part of the music, and then when you're in a 2-piece, you want to fill it out as much as possible. You want it to sound really loud and big. And then Wimp City just kind of stopped being a thing. And then after that, I wasn't in a band for a while. I think like 2 or 3 years. I can't remember exactly. And I was also like at the tail end of college, and I didn't really have as much time, and you know, and I don't have the time to meet new people and practice or whatever. And then I had just reconnected with an old friend of mine, and he moved back to Hamilton, or was living in Hamilton, and his downstairs neighbor, we would hang out with him sometimes, and his name is Mackenzie Langton, and he used to play in bands. He was from was from Montreal. He now lives in Hamilton, and we just talk about trying to start a band, and we'd be like, we should do it. And so we would hang out on the porch of their house, and his friends from Montreal would come and visit all the time, and he just had some friends move to Hamilton from Montreal. Jeremy and Mandy, and they came over, and we would just like hang out. We'd have barbecues on their porch and just hang out all night, like all the time. And we found out that Mandy played drums, and we're like, okay, well, let's start a band. And I was just saying to her, I'm like, I want to be in like a power pop band, or like, you know, like a punk band, but more on like the fun side of things, like, you know, major chords, fun, you know. And I like playing more heavy music or more emo music or whatever. I'm like, I want to be in a fun band, like I described before. And so we started jamming. We were originally going to call ourselves Okie Doker, which I still think is a good name, but I know it is a bad name. And I think we had written like 3 songs at that point, but we didn't have a singer, and we didn't know if we wanted to sing, and I was just doing vocals while playing bass in another band. I didn't really like it. And And then around that time, I had started working at Cheapies and becoming close with the people who worked there. And my friend Paige worked there, and we were talking about music. And this was also at a point in time where noise started becoming really popular in Hamilton, and there was a noise night and a lot of noise shows happening. And she's like, I'd love to be in a noise band. And we came up with this concept for a noise band that never came to be. But I'm like, well, do you just want to be in my band? And she's like, I'd love to. And then so we already had songs, and then she started writing lyrics, and we all started jamming, and that's when Bad Crush happened. Still active today. And then after that, and it's funny because...
Sorry.
Yeah, no worries. It's funny because how the pendulum swings, because now I'm in this, like, you know, upbeat pop punk type thing. But now I'm like, well, now I need to be in a heavy band because I can't, you know, like, there's no, you know, destroying shit to well, actually, we got a lot of breakdowns in Bad Crush, but I was like, I need to be in a heavy band. And at that point, I had just started hanging out with my friend Ryan Ferguson a lot. Like, we would just hang out and watch movies, and I'd go to his house, and I think this was also around the time when Knocked Loose started getting big.
Yep.
And so I was listening to Knocked Loose a lot, and I was listening to a lot of Counterparts too, and just like I was also going through a bit of shit on my own end, so I was really angry, and I felt like I had a lot of things to get off my chest, and I was just like, I really want to be in a heavy hardcore band, and he's like, I could probably do that, and I'm like, really? And he plays in a band called Science-Spheric, and he had played in a band called Sensei, and they're more like shoegazy, like spacey, psych rock kind of thing. And
Science-Spheric were on Sonic Unreal, right?
Yeah, still are. Stay Down's actually playing with them at the end of the month. I was like, really? Because I didn't know if that was like his jam or whatever. And then Paul, who played in Sensei with him and who also played drums in Kestrels, he was like, yeah, me and Paul, like, you know, we'd mess around between whatever. And I'm like, well, let's do it. And then we started jamming, and just the three of us. So I was doing vocals, Paul was playing drums, Ryan was playing guitar. We needed a bass player. Who do I ask? I go to Vince. I say, you want to be in this band? He's always down. So that's when Stay Down started. And then after Stay Down, we've been playing... I'm trying to think about timelines now. So my friend and now roommate, Venus, had just moved to Hamilton from St. Catharines, and I had seen them at shows. They would go to Noise Night, and I'd see them there, and we became friends just seeing each other around and stuff. And then I think we had kind of started talking about... Or no, actually what happened, Venus and my good friend Cameron Craig, they were talking about starting a band. And Cameron plays guitar, and Venus wanted to do vocals. And me, I'm like, I want everyone to start a band, like, you know. And so I'm like, you should do it. And they're like, oh yeah, I don't know. And then I'm like, okay, so if you're not going to do it, I'll just start a band, and then you guys can join the band. And so me and Vince, who were both of us were like, start this band, and we just like jammed. We just like wrote 3 songs in one night, and we're like, okay, this is our band now. You play guitar, you do vocals. Vince was playing drums now, and I was playing bass. And so we were called Loose Fruit. We played a few shows. I think we're technically still a band. I think we have now definitely decided to be on indefinite hiatus, because we played right before the pandemic started. We played a couple times, and we played a couple times before that. And we had just finished a bunch of songs. We were planning on recording, and then things just people get busy, and so we haven't really been able to do anything in a while. But yeah, so there's that band, Loose Fruit. And then there was one other band right before the pandemic. Loose Fruit got asked to play a show at the Tower, actually, when Tower was just down here at the corner of Barton and Lottridge. And I don't know if they ever did any other shows, but Spacers from Montreal and Flat Teeth from Montreal came to play, and were just kind of involved in the anarchist scene, so they know those people, and they were playing. And I think Sadie and the Wives got asked to play, but they couldn't play. So Sameo asked if Loose Fruit could play. Loose Fruit couldn't play. So I just did the thing of, well, let's just start a new band. So me and Vince was playing drums, I was playing bass, 2-piece situation. And then I asked my girlfriend at the time to do vocals. And we were called Open Raw, one practice, one show. And yeah, that was right before the pandemic. And then since like lockdowns ended, Bad Crush, last summer we went on like a small little tour to Montreal and Ottawa, and then we've been trying to write new stuff, and Mac ended up leaving the band, and Vince ended up joining, of course, and then Stay Down. It's funny, we finished an EP right before the pandemic, and I just need to finish vocals on it, but I don't know, I'm just lazy and whatever. That'll come out at some point, hopefully soon. So Stay Down was kind of like on and off, whatever, and I was just like, I want to be in another hardcore band, or like more specifically like a power violence band, like trying to write really simple, fast songs, but also like having amazing mosh parts. Like that's just the idea. And the idea, because like I think it was with things that I was struggling with my bands, whereas like Bad Crush, we were trying to write new stuff, and Mac left the band, and it was like setbacks and stuff like that, and Stay Down, I was like being lazy about getting this EP done, and things, people were busy, and I was like, Vince, I just want to get into our practice space and write and record a whole EP in one day. I just want to get it all done and not think about it. I don't want to be in this like haze of is it done, is it not done, whatever. And he's like, cool, let's get it done. Let's try it. And I asked my friend Colin, who plays guitar in Cohesion and Sinner. Yep. We asked him. We're just like, he likes music like we do. I think he would understand it. We were like, we wanted. I feel like the idea with Cease was we really like Dead in the Dirt. And we were like, we just want to be in a band that sounds like Dead in the Dirt. I don't think we achieved that, but we tried. And he was just like, hell yeah, I like Dead in the Dirt. And so we got into our practice space, and we just like crushed an EP in one go. And Colin was just like, well, who are you thinking for vocals? And one of my best friends, Bridget Hrick, who I've been friends with for like, since we were in high school. And throughout all these years, since now, she's always been like, Luther, let's start a band. I need to be in a band. And I don't know what it was. I was just kind of like, yeah, we'll make it happen. We'll excuses. But Bridget, like, I don't know if you know Bridget, but
not sure.
She has like just the biggest energy out of maybe anybody I know. And she's just like so energetic and happy and like chaotic in a good way, and just like a very amazing, uplifting, a very upfront kind of person. And like I said, she's been asking me for years, and I was just like, I want Bridget to be in this band. And Colin didn't know Bridget, but Vince and I grew up with Bridget, and Vince was just like, yeah, Bridget was the first person I thought of too. And Colin was like, okay, we'll see. And in our heads, we were just like, well, we'll just get Bridget to do vocals on this. Well, she'll just come in and record them. But she's never been in a band before, so she didn't know how to just like do it. And so we had to start jamming together, which was amazing, because as soon as Bridget came into our practice space, Colin was like, yeah, this is it. This is what it is. And that's when Cease started. We didn't have a name for a while, but I had like a big list, and I tried to sell them on Cease. It took a while, but I eventually convinced them, and yeah, Cease is now what Cease is. And then like I said, I have a solo ambient project that I do on my own. I first started doing that in 2018 or 19, I think, because I had like started buying pedals, and I was just like, it's fun to just like do stuff on my own. Just like fun, spacey stuff, and like I said, I listen to all kinds of music, and it's like really fun to make really spacey, droney, meditative music. So I do that. I performed for the first time ever at Mulberry, because my friend Cameron, who is in Loose Fruit, they started doing live music there, and he was just like, oh, I'll have my friend. His boss was not happy about it. Yeah, and then I don't think I performed until after lockdown ended, maybe like a year ago now. And so I've been starting to doing that a little bit more consistently lately. My solo project's called A Hollow Body. Yeah, and I just recorded some stuff for that actually that should be out soon.
Awesome.
Yeah, yeah. So I think that's everything. I don't think I'm forgetting anything there.
Okay.
Yeah. What I like the most about being a musician is I feel like there's two things that really make it happen for me, and one is just the act of performing music. It's like it's truly a meditative thing for me. Like when I'm playing music, it kind of shuts the world out. You know what I mean? And especially playing live, like it's just it's like a way to quiet everything else and just like make everything go away and just be able to be like truly just in the moment and being just like completely reactive and just existing without everything else. And that's like I think a big part of why I really like playing music is being able to just kind of like escape the noise of everyday life. Yep. But beyond that is also kind of, I guess it's kind of related to that, is like sharing that with other people. And like when you go to a show or you play a show and it kind of feels like everyone, you know, if everyone's willing to participate, everyone kind of enters that wavelength. And you're in a room with a bunch of people who are all feeling and experiencing the same thing with you. And I think it's truly such a magical thing. I really do. And I think that's what makes me so excited about playing music, and it's why it's so important to me, and it's why I love also putting on shows aside from playing shows, is just like trying to promote connectivity and like community and just like inspire people and get inspired and really just like honestly just make life worth living. I guess that's what's important to me, so just trying to promote that sort of thing as much as possible. And it's funny, I was just having a conversation with a friend the other day about how like we all have this idealized version of what the world should be, and in my head it's kind of like ignore all outside influences and only really exist in that like pure version of yourself where you just like, again, just living in the moment and like creating that idealized version is utopia, and how we're all just trying to get to that point of like just being able to exist and be who you are and be seen as who you are. And I feel, and then my friend and I, we were talking about the idea of the micro utopia, and they're the moments where it feels like you're almost there. And I feel like when you're at a really good show, you're playing a really good show, that's what it is. It's like that moment where the world goes away. It doesn't matter about what you post online or what you wear or who you're friends with. It's about like hearing the music and reacting to it and just existing. And I love that. And it's like, honestly, the purpose of my life is just promoting that and making sure it happens, whether it's music or like comedy or film or anything, like anything creative. I just want everybody to be able to feel that with other people. It's really important to me. Dislike, rather than dislike, I'll just say some pet peeves I have. I think when people kind of start to have like a bit of like a rock star attitude and just kind of like forget that people are people and think that they're better than other people because they play certain kinds of music and they ignore people. It's just like, that really irks me, because it just, I think it can discourage people from being involved. And it's such a bummer, and I hear about it from other bands where they're just like, oh yeah, I used to play this kind of music, but the scene wasn't good, so I stopped playing music. And it's just like, and it's just bad attitudes, and that's really bums me out. Another pet peeve, bands that don't tear down fast enough. Like, if you think about it, it really shouldn't take you more than like 3 minutes to take your cymbals off of stands and your kick pedal, or unplug your guitar. And like, especially as someone who books shows, and it's like, we've got a tight schedule, you know, we have to be done by 11, and you know, and like the band starts chatting with people and the next band's waiting to go on. Like, if you're in a band, when you're done playing, get everything off the stage as quickly as possible. And I like, you know, do your thing, whatever, but it's just like, just be considerate of like, you know, how stressed, you know, maybe the next band is, or like the promoter or whatever. That's something that really irks me. Also, show posters where you can't read what's on the poster, and the text is like this big, and like the background is blue and the text is like another shade of blue, and you can't read it. That's another pet peeve of mine. But yeah, maybe like, mostly, like I said, the rockstar attitude, snobbishness, and exclusivity, that sort of stuff really irks me. And I think sometimes playing music, people, it can get to their head, and they can just have this like false sense of entitlement and think that they're better than other people, and it really bums me out. But yeah, I guess that's that's the thing I probably dislike the most. My favorite food is Red Rocket chicken wings. I guess there's a location on the mountain, but there's one at Maine in Wellington now, and I used to live really close there, and I ate it so much. Yes, yeah. But it's like the best. You know, it's fun. I really like chicken wings. I really do. But Red Rocket chicken wings are like this big,
So
and
breaded.
they're so crispy and juicy. And I'll get a chicken wing anywhere else, and I'm like, this is like, it sucks. And like, I'll still eat them. I love chicken wings, I really do. But Red Rocket chicken wings are totally where it's at. And one other thing is there's a place called Mexican Kitchen in the Hamilton Farmers Market. The burrito at the Mexican Kitchen at the Hamilton Farmers Market is so good. And it's like literally just like chicken, rice, and beans. But it's like the most flavorful thing ever. It's so amazing. Yeah, easily the best burrito in the city. Definitely grab one of those. Yeah. So useless talent, I think I'm a pretty practical person. I'm the type of person that I'm like, I'm not going to do something if it doesn't serve a purpose. But my useless talent is I'm really into movies. I'm really into like directors and actors and stuff like that. I'm definitely the person who's like, I'm hanging out with friends and someone's like, who's that guy? And I just know it right away, you know? Like, yeah. But as much as it might be useless, I guess in just like terms of growing the knowledge, but I still think like, if you need a suggestion for a movie, you can tell me what you like, and I can come up with something, you know? Like, you can tell me, well, I like this actor, I want to know what more stuff he's in. I can be like, I'll give you like a list of 10 movies, you know? That's the type of person I am, you know? I love music, but movies is like the time killer thing. It's like the isolation thing, you know? I'm just sitting here watching movies whenever I'm not doing anything else, really. And I'd just like to say a big thank you to Steve for coming out and letting me do this. His YouTube channel, I think, is really, really important. If you're watching this and you haven't watched any of his other videos, you should just like dig in and just watch these interviews. Even if you don't know the people, just watch them and listen to them anyway. There's so much history. There's so many people in this town who can just let you know so many cool things that have happened here. I know I've really enjoyed getting to see the videos that you have made, Steve has made, and obviously all the live videos are really great. It's so awesome to have someone documenting the things that are happening in Hamilton, and it's really, really significant.